Welcome back to Alive, Aware, Awake. We're now on day 4. And this evening we're moving on to an exploration of Citta, or thoughts and emotions, as shorthand. I'm sure Maitridevi is going to say a lot more about it now in the next while. So just to say, we'll be having, she's going to speak for a bit. There'll be a meditation and there'll hopefully be a chance for questions at the end. And we'll do, as previously, we'll just invite you to speak at that point. Yeah, so I'm just, without further ado, I'm just going to hand over to Maitridevi, who's going to introduce tonight's material. So thanks, Maitridevi.
Okay, thanks very much, Siddhi, and lovely to see all the faces, all in your little boxes. I've got 2 of the community with me. They look like little people here, don't they? But there's Annabeth and Sarah. They're actually the same size as me in real life. So it's nice to have them here. So I'm hoping you've listened. I'm just going to assume you've listened to the talk that's gone up today that I did on Citta. So hopefully I can just sort of work off of that talk. And what I wanted to do this evening is talk about stories, which is just a sort of theme that I'm quite interested in. I find get quite excited and engaged about it. So I want to begin with a story set a long time ago. And it's about a young man who's been searching for something for a long, long time. And he's undergone a great deal of hardship, leaving everything he had, living for years in the jungle, eating almost nothing, and nearly killing himself, trying to find what he's looking for, which is an end to suffering. And on this particular day, he's sustained himself with a little food, and he's seen what he needs to do. And he sees a tree, and he begins to walk towards the tree. And the tree is the world tree. And he walks towards it, and we're told that he walks with a stride that is firm, like a mountain, unshakable like a mountain, and with a stride which is majestic like a royal elephant, and with a stride that is powerful like the king of the lions. And he walks towards this tree, which is, as all world trees are, at the center of the world. And he sits himself on some grass at the roots of this tree. And he says something like, "The sun and the moon and all the stars may fall from the sky before I move again." And that's it. He won't move anymore. And this place where he's sitting, this place which is the center of the world, is also known as the Vajrasana, the diamond throne. And this is the point where all Buddhas of the past have gained enlightenment, and he sits himself there. And then we have a trickster figure, Mara, the deceiver and the Lord of Death, who sees this young man seated at the center of the world and understands that he's about to gain enlightenment, and also understands that if he does, he will teach all beings, and they too will be free, and his entire realm will be empty. And he's not happy about that. So he sends a huge army, the biggest army anyone has ever seen, of monstrous beings with bulging red eyes and distorted features and flames around them. And they're carrying swords and spears and clubs and stones and fire, and he sets them on this young man. And they throw everything at him with the fullness of their malice and rage and cruelty. And every single missile thrown just touches the golden aura around this young man, changes into a flower and falls around him at his feet. And the army see that they cannot win, and they turn tail and flee. Then Mara has another idea. He'll send his daughters, who are particularly gorgeous, very alluring and very distracting. And he thinks, I'll get this young man distracted this way. So he sends them, and they do try their best, and they're pretty good. But this young man, he doesn't even register them. He doesn't open his eyes. He doesn't move. Nothing happens. So they give up. And then Mara says, who are you? Who are you to sit on that diamond throne, which is the center of the world? Who are you to sit there? That's my place. And all his army cry out, yes, that's his place. Mara can sit there. That's not yours. And this young man doesn't say anything, but he takes his hand and he touches his body from his head down to his feet, and then he touches the earth. And as he touches the earth goddess rises up and she bows to him and she says, I have been here all along. I have seen everything. I have seen everybody's lives. I know what has been done and what has not been done. And he has a right to sit in that place, on that diamond throne. So you're probably very familiar with that story, just setting the Buddha in his place just on the eve of his enlightenment. So he's just about to gain enlightenment. And I wanted to begin with a story because I want to be talking about stories. And if you've listened to the talk that I did on Citta, on the heart mind, in it I mention mental proliferation, the sort of thing that happens in meditation where you just get caught up in a story. Yeah. And it's a distraction. And we might be very familiar with thinking, well, stories are basically distractions. They're basically mental proliferation. And we get caught in them. We lose our awareness. The storylines often cause us suffering. And what we should do is calm down. So the stories, for me, the experience of story often happens up here. The instruction in meditation is to come down into the body, come down into feeling and sensation and direct experience, or bare experience. But if you were listening to the question and answer last night, at least one person was saying, well, it's really important for them to come down into the body, into that experience, but they also need to know why they're bothering. There's a sort of so what? So I come down into sensation in my body. So there's a tingling, but so what? So in a way, what's missing is value or meaning. And this is where stories come in again. So a story is a narrative that weaves together events and experience into some meaningful account. And you could say that to understand anything is to story it. And another way of thinking of it is that the mind has a sort of way of interpreting the world. We have a sort of interpretive framework. And we take experience and we fit it into that framework, and that's how we make sense of things. We actually can't function without it. But I think sometimes when we talk about Buddhist practice, there's this sense of wanting to get back to bare experience, which is important. And also culturally, what we have is a sort of scientific perspective where we want to strip away our accounts of the world to get back to the bare facts. This sense of a sort of ultra objectivity where we can see how things really are. But as David Loy, who's another Buddhist writer, says, this idea of bare facts is a story itself. It's a story that there is such a thing. So we have this scientific story that there's bare facts, and it's possible that there's some sort of objective truth that we can get to. But the trouble is, we're not objective beings. Our citta, our heart mind, is not a blank slate that receives the world. It's something that actively goes into the world, coloured by all its perspectives and ideas and beliefs. So maybe it's more as if there are experiences, events, and facts, but they arise within this interpretive framework. And maybe I was thinking, I don't really like the word framework. I was thinking maybe more they arise within a sort of sea or an ocean of understanding or misunderstanding. And what they arise into determines what they are understood to be, and also determines the effect that experience can have. So the point I'm trying to make is that we are story beings, and we live through story, and we live by story. And what we think about ourselves is also story. But maybe we can go back to this idea of papancha, or mental proliferation, which is a distraction, and say, well, but that's not a helpful story, is it? So maybe what we need to think about is that there's different types and levels of story. So mental proliferation, this distractedness that we get in our meditation, the story loops that we get caught up in, are like attention traps. That they're like awareness stuck in an attention trap. And well, there's also an image of maybe them being like a story bus almost, that you get on and you're inside, whereas you could have just watched it go past. But these stories, these particular stories, are circular, and they tend to be tightening, and they are coloured with grasping and with resisting and with ignoring. And they've got quite a strong sense of me and I in them. In fact, that me and I is the tightening, is the grasping, is the resisting. And they tend to produce pain, painful experience. But there are other stories which are stories of freedom. Or James Hillman, the depth psychologist, talk about healing fictions, which I think might be something similar, stories that heal. And they're stories which have a sense of openness, spaciousness, and possibility in them. They allow transformation, and they don't have a strong sense of I or me. So maybe what we need to do is move between those stories, from ones which are closed to ones which are open. So I was just thinking about this and remembering, because we all have stories, and often they're stories about ourselves, as well as, well, and our stories about other people indirectly are stories about us, because they're about what we think. about the world. But when I first came along to a Buddhist center, well, I had two stories, and one was I'm not really a spiritual being, because I'd never had that in my life before. So I just thought, well, I can't be. So I was going along to the Buddhist center 3 nights a week for nearly a year, thinking, I'm not a spiritual being. I'm not a Buddhist. And it was nearly a year before it occurred to me that this was just frankly silly, because clearly I was just, my whole life was revolving around the Buddhist center at that point. So I had to just change my view about myself. But then I came across another view, which was I don't have enough life experience to be a Buddhist, because I was quite young. And other people seem to know about pain and dukkha, which was what Buddhists talked about quite a lot. And I felt I didn't know enough. So I also couldn't be a Buddhist. And in a way, I couldn't get very far with those views. And looking back, I can see that there were two possibilities, two ways. I could simply exclude myself from being able to participate. So I had stories which excluded me. And until those stories changed into stories that allowed me in, I couldn't really get very far. So you could think of religions as providing a sort of meta narratives, meta stories, so stories on a huge level. And if that's the case, then the narrative of Buddhism is one of freedom and love. And it does matter what you believe. It does matter what stories you engage with, because the limits of my story are the limits of my world. I can't go beyond the stories that I believe. But changing stories isn't a matter of, it's not a matter of conscious decision. I think there's a whole process to it. So what we're looking at in terms of the foundations of mindfulness is cultivating a stillness and an awareness and a simplicity and a groundedness that allows the noise of our dominant stories, which might be quite painful and unhelpful, it allows those to die away a bit. It allows us to recognize those as stories. But it also creates a space for glimpses of new possibilities, of other stories. And you could say that what insight is, and insight can be a big thing or lots of little things, is these paradigm shifts where suddenly you realize that you could see something and you are seeing something quite differently from how you were. The story's changed. You're actually living in a new story. So just returning to these 4 foundations of mindfulness, the stories are in a way what happens in this realm of Citta, where we go through the gateway of heart-mind. We come into the realm of stories. And what we're being offered with these 4 gateways of mindfulness is a practice of awareness that has a vision behind it, which is a liberative vision. It's a vision of what humanity can become at its very best. And apparently even enlightened beings, even Buddhas, continued to practice mindfulness. It's a natural expression of the enlightened state. But I wanted to say that the story that I told at the beginning of the Buddha to be approaching the Vajrasana is also an expression of mindfulness, but more in image. So to walk like a lion or an elephant and to be unshakable like a mountain, that is what mindfulness is. and to recognize rage and cruelty, or desire and lust, just as states of mind arising and passing away without identifying them with them, is what mindfulness is. Just to remain undisturbed. That is the practice. And meditating with the earth as your witness, that is also mindfulness. And sitting on the diamond throne, that is also what mindfulness looks like. So sometimes the Satipatthana Sutta, these 4 foundations of mindfulness, can sound a bit like a list and lots of different practices. But actually, they can be storied into images. And what we have with the stories of the Buddha gaining enlightenment are those qualities. So it's very qualities that we find in the Satipatthana Sutta actually being imaged into as a being who's gained enlightenment or is gaining enlightenment. So allow images and stories to speak to you. They can create a different way of practicing. They can take something like mindfulness, which can seem quite maybe simple and cool, and enrich it. Yeah, enrich it. So what I thought we'd do is we'll have a meditation, and we'll just imagine a little bit as we meditate this diamond throne that the Buddha was sitting upon, because it makes a difference what you imagine when you meditate. So we'll probably sit for about 25 minutes. So just taking the time that you need just to set yourself up so you're comfortable. And you can just have a sense maybe that after years you've come to this point, this moment in your life, this particular place. And you can sit down, perhaps with the same confidence as the Buddha to be. We too can attain enlightenment. But if we're to do so, we need to sit confident. And where we sit becomes the Vajrasana, this diamond throne at the center of the world. This is the mythical point. So what does it mean to align yourself at the center of the world, at the roots of the world tree rising up behind you? Your spine and the tree rising together. The roots of your posture and the roots of the tree extending downwards. And the crown of your head and the crown of the tree extending upwards to the sky. And just allowing any tension to ease from the body, from the face and neck and throat. Just releasing through the shoulders and the shoulder blades. Long and supple through the spine. And in a way to come back to the center of the world and the root of the tree is to come back home. So can we just sit with a sense of having returned home? A sense that this is where we belong. Just becoming aware to the fullness of our experience as we sit here. The sensations of the body. It's the simplicity of pleasure, pain, or neutral feeling. And all the emotions, all the feelings of the heart and the movements of the heart. Just be aware of them. Just allow them. And all of the thoughts, trains of thought, stories. Just recognizing thoughts and stories and emotions as they arise. As they stay a while and as they pass away. We can do that with a sense of being completely aligned, this central point of the world. Completely settled and present. With something unshakable about us. And perhaps we can have a sense too of a touching down of our being into earth. And this rising up of the earth to witness us. We are completely known to earth, and we always have been. So we can just sit rooted, centered, witnessed, and breathing. And if you notice you're getting caught in a story, you just come back down into the body, sensation. Into the stillness of your being. Because there's a much bigger story we're sitting in, which is one of complete freedom. Clarity and love. Just notice what's happening now. Just come back to the breath. Come back to your diamond throne. So I've left a little bit of time just to see if anyone's got any comments or questions or anything they'd like to say.
I found. Oh, am I still muted?
No, you're there, Mudita-Lila, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was beautiful for me. It was. I'm very into stories. I'm very heady, so I can relate to stories really well. But there was a certain point when I was aware I was perhaps going off into a story and thought, why not stay with this story? You know, if my head is busy with stories, why not connect the whole of me to this story of me being here now? And it was wonderful. It was really expansive and more comfortable rather than being caught up in the head. I actually was able to say, well, if I'm into making stories, why not go with this story? And it felt a lot more comfortable, at ease, more present, and a lot more energy. That was beautiful. So thank you.
So that's interesting. So it sounds like it's maybe it's easy to get into a fight sometimes, isn't it, with what's happening in meditation that you think shouldn't be happening.
Sure. It's a lot to do with the shoulds and oughts.
Yeah.
Rather
And then you decide actually maybe it's fine.
Yeah.
And that changes everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Right.
that's very interesting, isn't it? The way we can create a sort of battle, an inner battle with a should or a shouldn't.
Yeah.
And sometimes just having permission to do something different, changes everything.
Thank you.
Maybe there aren't any questions. I think one thing I wanted to say, I don't know whether I'm repeating myself, but it's something around fantasy and imagination, where, and this is the difference between helpful stories and distracting stories. And when a narrative or a story is going on in meditation, sometimes the question can be, should I go with that narrative because it keeps coming again and again, or is that a distraction and should I come back into the body or the breath or whatever the focus of meditation is? So I find this quite an interesting question of what's a distraction and what isn't. So, I mean, one way of testing is if there's an awareness of the body. So the body imagines and the body images. So it's very rich, and it will offer you imagery sometimes in meditation, which can be really helpful. So if the body is there for you, in a way, then that's fine. You can kind of be interested in image that's coming up. If in a way you've lost the body, in other words, you've sort of dissociated, gone off, you're not, the awareness has kind of got caught within something, then in a way you're probably off in what I'd call fantasy. Yeah. So you've lost your presence. You're not really present fully to your experience. So that's, what we'd be trying to come back from, what you're trying to come down into the body from, to try and ground that in some sort of way. I don't know if that is a familiar distinction for people. Yeah, Deborah.
Interesting, because there's been a couple of occasions in meditation over the last few years where a strong story has appeared, one around Bhante and one around Akshobhya. And so it's quite difficult to know whether it's fantasy or whether it's actually something that's like a teaching. And after you just said, was there an awareness in the body? I've thought back to both of those occasions, and I was acutely aware of my body on those occasions. In fact, it was quite a bodily experience. So it's a very useful thing, should it happen again, if to sort of distinguish it from being a fantasy or something that I've just conjured up in my mind, or the situation has provoked it. To look for that bodily awareness, and then if it's still there, then allow myself to continue to travel with it. So that's a really strong piece of information for me. Thank you.
Yes, it feels really important to be able to distinguish between those two, so that if the body, in a way, how is the body to speak to you, or the heart to speak to you, if not through something like image? And it feels like a shame if we ignore it because you've labeled it a distraction or a fantasy. When actually there's something speaking to you. Often it will keep going, sort of keeps trying to get through. But yes, it's a question, I think, to always hold in meditation. It's like, what is actually going on here? Am I avoiding? Is this an avoidance? Am I distracting myself from something? Is there something I'm not willing to experience? Or is this something unfolding into experience because I'm allowing it? Yeah.
It become apparent what it was in the end, and that it was a teaching, because it continued and there was full awareness around it. But it's still incredibly useful to just have that little bit of information. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. So we've just got a couple of minutes if anyone else has got a question or comment, and then we'll finish. Well, maybe we can stop there. I'll just hand back to Citta. I think you do concluding remarks, don't you?
I do, concluding remarks. Exciting, very exciting concluding remarks for me. Thanks very much, Maitridevi. That was really wonderful. And yeah, I also appreciated just being reminded of that distinction between fantasy and imagination. I think it's always good. Yeah, I guess I was just struck by this, the foundations themselves. I'm sort of vaguely wondering if, the body being the sort of base foundation, and then we, coming back to the body seems like a really useful thing to do always, to be able to distinguish between, something that's helpful and something that's not so helpful. So anyway, thank you very much for that, and the beautiful meditation as well. So tomorrow we're going to be moving on to the exploration of Dhammas. So hopefully you can join us again for that. Same time, same place. You find the link and all the retreat materials on thebuddhistcenter.com/awake. And the videos from previous live sessions are beginning to go up on that space as well now. So we have day 1 and day 2 up, and more will be following once we get a chance to do that. So you can also rewatch them there, or either there or on the Taraloka YouTube channel. Also, just to remind you, if you want to join in daily meditation sessions, you can. We run them at thebuddhistcenter.com/meditation, so 3 times a day. If you want to have an experience of collective meditation while this retreat is going on, or just more generally, not even beyond this home retreat. And yeah, so that's it for this evening. So what I will do now is I just invite you to unmute yourself and maybe say your thanks and say goodbyes. And as I said, hopefully see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. It's wonderful.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.